Sam Kahn, theathletic.com. My goodness, Sam, think you're on today, but the Mike Gundy story, we'll get to John Mateer, but the Mike Gundy story was imminent. It just seemed like it was a matter of time, but the timing's a little bit weird being on a Tuesday. Your thoughts about that the legacy will always be there, but the run is over.
Yeah, I think once they lost the way they did at Oregon to get pasted, was it 69-3? That to me spelled the end of this, and it just became a matter of time as to when it would happen. And then when they lost to Tulsa on Friday, you knew for sure it was over. And again, it was just, I think a lot of us thought it would happen over the weekend, and then the weekend comes and goes, and he hosts a press conference on Monday and talks for about 30, 40 minutes, and including about his job status for a while. So like, okay, maybe they're going to ride this out for a little bit longer. And clearly we find out today that's not the case. But I mean, look, great coach, winningest coach at Oklahoma State by a mile, deservedly so. He really raised that program to a new level. Obviously took them to a Big 12 title, took them to New Year's Six Bowls, made them really competitive. One of the most consistent programs in his time. But it was very clear that over the last several years, and particularly the last couple of years, that he had not adapted and adjusted to what college football is now. And by time he finally did, it was too late. The roster talent hollowed out. We could see that because when you watch that Tulsa game, you'd be hard pressed to tell me they had the better players in Tulsa that night. And so that ultimately, when you look at not winning a conference game last year, 11 straight losses to FBS programs, it was time to move on.
How much do you think the emotion of losing to Tulsa for the first time in Stillwater since 1951 maybe helped that decision along?
I don't know if so much it's emotion about losing to Tulsa, but I think it's the fact that you look how you looked against a group of five program. It does add extra salt in the wound that it's an in-state program that, like you said, I think they hadn't lost to them, period, in 25 plus years, and hadn't lost to them in Stillwater since 51. And it's a program right down the road, and a young coach, Trey Lamb, who looks like he's got some things going there now at Tulsa in his first year there. And they just got outplayed. You watch that game in the first half. I'm telling you, I'm watching Tulsa's defensive line, and I thought to myself, these dudes look better than the defensive line Oklahoma State's trotting out there. And that should not be the case if you are supposedly more well-resourced a program as Oklahoma State should be as a Power 4 program. There's no reason why your roster should look like a middle-of-the-pack group of five roster, which is what it looked like.
Yeah, and I think, if anything, Oklahoma State should kick the tires on Trey Lamb a little bit, at least throw his name and do a little due diligence on there. And with that in mind, Sam, I mean, Zach Robinson's a clear name that jumps off the page for everybody, and there are some other logical choices that could be interested in this job. What do you think of this job, the way it currently sits? And it seems to me like just the right guy can have a lot of success, but what do you think of the makeup of Oklahoma State at this time and some of the potential candidates and names to know?
Well, certainly Gundy's accomplishments there have raised the floor on this job, because the floor on this job was bottom of the conference a long time ago. And now if you have the resources, and again, it's a big if you're willing to dedicate the resources to spend on the roster at the full revenue share cap and maybe get yourself some third-party NIL to be competitive with other programs in the Big 12, then you're talking about a program that should be in the middle of the pack at its floor and should be competing for a conference title at its best on a regular basis. That's what Mike Gundy had at Oklahoma State. So if you take that in consideration, I think it's an appealing job. I think this is a job where you don't have to necessarily take a risk on a first-time head coach or somebody unproven. I think you can go get a sitting head coach. Now, it may have to be a group of five head coach. Maybe you're thinking of a G.J. Kinney, an Eric Morris, somebody like that, and Alex Galesh. I don't know how interested he would be to come to this part of the country, but maybe that's a guy you kick the tires on. But I think you have some real options here. Again, if you have alignment and if you show and prove that you have resources, because one thing that struck my mind and struck me about this whole situation was right before they played Oregon, Gundy talked about how much money they didn't have. And so that's a question for me is you're in a conference now with Texas Tech, who's spending out the wazoo, and I'm not necessarily expecting you to compete with them, but you should be able to compete with everybody else in that league. And when you look at some of their takes in the portal this offseason, it made me wonder how much they really are spending in the portal. And so the next coach is going to have to know what do we have from a resource standpoint to go get players? And if you have that, then I think you can attract some really good candidates because you have access to the state of Texas from your proximity in Oklahoma. And this is a place that they have invested in facilities, and they have proven in the past that they're willing to invest to win.
You're right about the fact that you see some of these programs with what Tech and also the win against Utah, which we can get to, but how they have surged and the commitment is there. Everybody has put money into the program or whatever, but there's different layers of that now. And there are 2 or 3 programs in the Big 12 that have to kind of blank or get off the pot. What are you going to be? Are you just going to be fade into oblivion or be average? Or are you going to go ahead and join the arms race and get it done?
Absolutely. That's what this coaching search is largely going to be about. It's going to tell us how committed are they? Because whatever coach interviews for this job is going to want to know, can I go compete for transfers with my peers? If you've got Texas Tech and BYU are paying a lot of money, or if you got TCU's paying a lot of money, Baylor's paying a lot of money, Oklahoma State needs to be competing for players with those programs. And so if you're going to need money to do that, you're going to need boosters to get invested in. And Oklahoma State obviously has a very rich history. Obviously, we know T. Boone Pickens, when he was alive, was very invested. But they also have other high-level donors there they're invested in that program. They've got to make sure they step up and make sure they can compete for players. And if you do, then I think you can attract a good coach. I know you guys have talked about Zach Robinson. I think he's interesting, but I would think he's probably on a track to get an NFL head coaching job before too long. So I don't know how feasible that is. But some of the other names you see, Arbuckle is interesting. Super young, would be a first-time head coach. Will Stein is interesting. I really like Morris. I really like G.J. Kinney. I think Traylor is probably going to go for this job. You would think he would put his hat in the ring for this one. And then you have some other intriguing candidates like Colin Klein at Texas A&M. The offensive coordinator has not been a head coach before, but obviously has a pretty good coaching resume. So there's a lot of different ways you can go with this job, and I think it has enough appeal. And again, with this location, and if they're willing to invest, I think you can attract some pretty good candidates.
You said if they're willing to invest. I wonder, Sam, if their lack of funds was due to maybe a lack of enthusiasm in the direction of the program, and if they get a new coach, all of a sudden they have some newfound money.
I would have to believe that that's probably part of it, is that you know how it goes. And this goes back to the days of recruiting before we had NIL. Is well, the quickest way to get a guy out is to dry up the money and to say, you know what, I'm not going to donate unless this guy's out. I think that's one part, but I think a lot of it, and I think Mike Gundy would admit this himself, probably has as many interviews that he's done. Gundy was really reluctant to adapt to this new era. I know you guys are familiar with it because Dave Aranda at Baylor talked a lot about it, about how uncomfortable he was with it. It really didn't seem like Oklahoma State really went all in this era until this last year, right before we got into rev share. And I'm not even sure that they are all the way in based on what you see and hear in terms of their player acquisition. But Gundy fundamentally, and you guys heard it when he was at his press conference on Monday, he talked about it. Because I think Barry Trammell, somebody asked him, are you okay? Are you saying that you're okay with NIL and transfer portal and the way it is? He didn't say yes. He said, it doesn't matter how I feel. It's like if you get into an argument with your wife, even if you're right, it doesn't really do you any good to keep on going. So Gundy, I think in a way is still saying that he really fundamentally doesn't believe in what we're doing in college football in 2025. And that's totally his right. But it puts you at a competitive disadvantage if that's the way you feel. And if you're not going to operate your program at the level that everybody else is, and if you're not going to do everything that everyone else is to get players, then you're not going to get the players.
So, Sam, I'm sure somewhere in like Norman or Oklahoma City or somewhere, there was some Oklahoma fan who's like, ha, ha, ha. And then about 5 minutes later, news drops that OU Heisman favorite star quarterback John Mateer is going to miss what looks like it could be the next 3 weeks or so with a hand injury suffered in what is believed to be the first quarter against Auburn this past weekend. I don't know how much it was swirling out there that he could be banged up to this extent, but this seems to have landed like an atom bomb for obvious reasons in the last 20 to 30 minutes. Your thoughts on this Mateer injury and the potential effects on Oklahoma as a whole this immediate future and football season?
Yeah, what a day in the state of Oklahoma today. My goodness. That's a big one. Oklahoma, it changes and alters their status as a contender in the conference. There's no doubt about it. And that's not to take anything away from Michael Hawkins, who was a really nice recruit. And I think they really had a lot of belief in him. And really what we saw of him last year, it's really hard to judge because we know what the circumstances were around Michael Hawkins, the injuries at the receiver room, how messy their offensive line was, the offensive coordinator situation, which of course they made a change in that. So the offense that Michael Hawkins is stepping into this year is a lot better, and the personnel around him is a lot better than it was a year ago. So that gives Michael Hawkins a better chance for success. I'm just hoping John Materia, this is selfish on my part, I'm hoping he's back for Red River because I want to see him against Texas in a few weeks at the Cotton Bowl. But yeah, it fundamentally, when you look at their schedule, if he's not there, man, you look at Oklahoma going from contender to probably not one. I mean, unless Michael Hawkins can play at the level that Mateer is playing, I don't see them being a legitimate bona fide contender without him. Now, one thing that is their saving grace, and you saw it on against Michigan, you saw it against Auburn, that defense and that defensive front is impressive. They have got some dudes. They have really rebuilt that defensive front. Brent Venables is doing a great job with it. And so I think that can keep them in some games for sure. But if he's only out 2 or 3, maybe you can survive for a little bit. If you're out any longer than that, man, I think it really hurts you down the road if you're Oklahoma in terms of contender for the college football playoff.
Yeah, they're fortunate there's Kent State. But then here you go. Like you said, that schedule gets to be unbelievable, even if he was healthy. I mean, you'd think they would win maybe a few of them, if not a chunk of them. But now you wonder what a kick in the you-know-what's after beating Auburn. And, of course, a lot of drama with that game, too. Sam Kahn with us today, taking us up until around 3:55 or so. And then Jahan Jararaja will join us just after 4 o'clock.
Sam, who do you think is the next coach to go?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. Who are the guys on the hot seat right now?
Let's see. I would say Sam Pittman,
Napier,
Billy Napier,
Luke Fickell.
I would say
Napier.
Three.
I would say Napier out of those guys. It's you look at their schedule. Where are the wins coming from? Given the way they're playing, DJ Lagway's not playing very well. The one saving grace for them, their defense is playing okay, but I just don't see it. I think everybody's so out on him. Fickell, maybe he's got a big buyout that could buy him some time. Pittman, I think, is clock's ticking, but I don't think I don't get the sense they're going to do that mid-season. And that's just my sense on it. But Napier feels like the next one to go in my opinion.
I kind of got a weird feeling with Pittman when he brought Bobby Petrino on, knowing that Bobby Petrino feels like he probably should have never been fired from that job. And with Billy Napier, look, DJ Lagway's walking around this week in a boot, and they're on bye. It would not shock me to see him say, I'm going to go ahead and take this red shirt and then see how this happens and get healthy. And then whatever happens, whether Lagway's in the portal or not. But he hasn't gotten any better. Their offense is terrible. And it seems to me a lot like the Jimbo Fisher situation at A&M is you're supposed to be the offensive guy, right? And if the one thing that you know is the worst part about the team, and it's not even close, then the clock's ticking, and it might just be buyout math at this point for Florida and Billy Napier.
They have yet to score more than 16 points in a game this year. Like, that is incredible, especially when you consider the kind of quarterback you have, the kind of talent you should have on that roster. And Lagway, in some ways, I think saved Billy Napier last year because he played well, and also he uses leverage. Players can use their leverage now. It's like, hey, if this guy goes, I'm going too. And so that kind of saved him. Well, now if you're Lagway and you're banged up and you're not playing at the level that they expected you to, that leverage is kind of gone. So he doesn't really have that ace in the hole anymore. Napier doesn't. And so you've got Texas and Texas A&M the next couple of weeks after this off week. So you're looking at a 1-5 start potentially. And I think at that point, I don't know if he makes it to the cocktail party at that point. Because and the way they're playing, if he does make it to the cocktail party, they're going to get hammered. Because Georgia offensively, Gunnar Stockton looks really good. That offense, we saw what they did against Tennessee. I thought they were really impressive. They're defensively, I think, not quite a Kirby Smart defense that I'm used to, but considering how bad Florida is offensively, I can't imagine they would have figured it out to that point to beat Georgia at that point. But I think if you don't do it after Texas A&M, if you're 1-5, then I certainly think if you get hammered in the cocktail party, that's probably curtains for Billy Napier.
So, Sam, we talked a lot about Texas Tech and Utah leading into that game last week, had that one circled back in the summertime. We've now seen it. Tech rolls in there, and despite being a bit rattled by the crowd, despite an injury to their starting quarterback, they come out of the other side somehow looking even better than anybody could have expected. What were your thoughts on Tech's big win out in Salt Lake?
Really, really impressed that they won a game that ugly, because in the past, that is the kind of game Texas Tech would have lost. They've had games like, you guys remember the Wyoming opener they had a few years ago where they had committed a bunch of penalties. They were very undisciplined, and they lost that game in overtime when they should have won it. They were not even close to scratching the surface of how good they can be offensively. Baron Martin turns the ball over 2 times. They've got procedure penalties out the wazoo. They could not really get any kind of flow consistently offensively. And yet there was never a time where I thought Utah was going to threaten them because of how good that defensive front was. This was supposedly, I guess, from what Kyle Whittingham had said, I think they said on the broadcast that Kyle Whittingham said this was the best offensive line he's ever had. But Texas Tech ate those guys up. I mean, that front, which they paid good money for, ate those guys up. And then the other thing that impressed me was how good they are on the back end. They're very athletic on the second and third levels. Those guys are attacking the ball. Those guys are getting to the ball. The defense, I can't remember. This is a program that we've associated so much with offense, with the Air Raid, the Mike Leach era, the Cliff Kingsbury era, and they score points and all that. The defense is going to carry this team. And once they do figure it out offensively, then what happens? And so I come out of that thinking if Baron Morton's healthy, and even if he's not, Will Hammond looks pretty damn good. But if they can just hang on offensively, because they lost Quentin Joyner, so I thought Cam Dickey and Jacoby Williams were really good, but the depth there is not super great. So you got to hope you can keep those backs healthy. Got to hope you can keep your quarterback healthy. If you can do those things, man, they are, I think, sitting pretty for the rest of this run through the Big 12.
By the way, the Luke Fickell buyout has been reported at $25 million, which is, of course, nothing compared to Jimbo. Napier's would be just below that. And does anyone realize that Paul Christ, who was fired at Wisconsin, was 67-26 there, and they fired him?
Well, it's that, and also Dan Mullen had a fantastic record in Florida compared to what Billy Napier's done, and they fired him. So I would say,
and he's 4-0 now at UNLV.
Both those guys are in trouble just based on they were tired of winning a little bit less than they were in the previous coach, and now they're winning a lot less.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. It's kind of funny how that works, right? Is you fall off the perch a little bit, and you're like, we saw this at Texas too, right? Remember when Mac Brown got run out, even though they weren't winning 10 games, but they were winning 8 games or 9 games. They had the 1-5-7 year, but they were still above 500 program, and then they spent the next 7 years trying to find the right coach, and they finally landed on one of Steve Sarkisian. But you Smoke, I know you're familiar with this one. You think of how long Nebraska searched for a coach after Tom Osborne era, Solich.
Yeah, that was a nightmare with Peterson, the AD, and what they were trying to do. They ended up with a football coach who was in the NFL who came in and changed. Yeah, they're still not recovered from the early 2000s with that one. Now, last thing, Utah and Devin Dampier, and there is questions about whether Whittingham was, and were they going by the rules? We're going to get into that ourselves later in the show, along with our conference crossover rankings. But do you see anything there where Utah maybe blurred the rules and policy at all?
So here's the thing about that. These are termed as availability reports, not injury reports.
Yep.
And what we have seen lately with Kyle Whittingham in this instance and Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss is a very unique strategic interpretation of that rule. And I think what they are arguing, what both of those programs are arguing, is we did not have any doubt that he would be available. And that's why he was not on the availability report. But that's different from being injured and knowing whether he's healthy enough to start or play. I think there was some quibbling in the SEC. Well, They don't say you have to designate if it's a starter, so to speak. So Austin Simmons played even though he didn't start. All this is finding a loophole, and you know how it is in college football. Make a rule and wait for the coach to find the loophole. Yeah. The thing that bothers me about it is the whole reason that the conferences say they came out with these reports was to protect the integrity of the players and to protect them from gamblers who wanted to incentivize them to give up information. And to me, when you use the rule this way, that flies in the face of it because you're trying to game the report. And so you're withholding information. So you're creating the actual threat, so to speak, that the conferences tried to avoid by creating these in the first place. They wanted to get the gamblers out and say, hey, don't bother our players for information. So-and-so practice is so-and-so going to play. And hey, let's offer this kid some money for that. The whole point of coming out with these was to avoid that. But if you have coaches treating it like this, then you were inviting that into this whole conversation. And so that's my biggest hang up. Let's make it a clear rule and say, hey, if someone is injured and if there's uncertainty, and maybe we should just go to calling an injury report rather than availability report.
Right,
and I understand they do that because of the privacy laws with students and all that stuff. I understand that. But the NFL has it a certain way. Maybe you have to more closely mirror the NFL, because if what you're trying to accomplish is protect the players from people trying to prey on them for information, then you've got to stop the coaches from finding the loopholes to get away from not giving that information.
Well, Whittingham was the one who didn't release the depth chart because he had to release an availability report.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing.
Like it anyway.
College coaches are paranoid and have been paranoid and will be paranoid till the end of time. And
Always.
So any way they can disclose, find a way to hide information or not disclose information, they'll do it. The quicker and sooner we can get to something like the NFL where you mandate this stuff, the better. And to me, it's going to be up to the conferences to do that.
Well, they're doing that now with conferences and realignment and NIL and transfer portal, etc. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate you, buddy. Appreciate your time. Thanks for jumping on with us, Sam. Con